Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. I am your co-host, Thomas Vick, joined by Seth Wilson, the other co-host of this podcast. Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast has usually covered all kinds of estate planning and elder law and estate and trust administration topics, but here in 2025, we are going to continue to do that, but also we are going to start talking more about law practice management and kind of using our experience and kind of our resources to talk about how we have built up our own practices and how that might be able to be a resource to other attorneys who want to do similar things. So Seth and I were talking before this podcast, and we kind of decided that here we might talk about what we plan to do for 2025 as far as law practice management is concerned. What are some goals that we're wanting to do? And with that introduction, Seth, I'll just kind of turn it over to you, and you can kind of introduce that topic to us.
Thanks, Thomas. It's great to see you as always. And, it's always amazing to me how fast time goes when you turn the page to a new calendar year. And if you're not careful, you can find yourself drifting through the year and sort of letting life happen to you rather than having a plan and trying to execute that plan within the context of what's going on. And so, as we've thought about how we want to approach things and be intentional with our practices, including our time putting together these resources in the podcast that we do, thought it might be a good hand and glove type fit to say, hey, we get the opportunity to address these client questions over time, but we're somewhat limited in how we can serve those clients just by our available time. And so we also think about the attorney shortage that is predicted in the near future and little types of things that may happen there. So it's kind of fun to say, well, maybe we can utilize this platform to help somebody who's thinking about going out and opening maybe a more estate plan based practice, what you would do, and kind of talk about, what are some of the essentials that you would need inside of that to provide for clients, but then also how do you manage what that practice looks like on a day-to-day basis. And then as you grow, what do you do when things start progressing, and what do you do maybe if it's not growing? How do you address those kind of considerations? And I think, as we mentioned last week, we both have quite a bit of experience now, such as it is given our practice time, with all of those considerations, both some of the, hey, we had some good times here and maybe not so great times here, and what does that look like? How do you navigate it? And so, yeah, as we're thinking about 2025, I mean, there are certainly some specific plan completion goals that we have in place for our office, and that's largely based on what we've done in the past, and we know our capacity is. And so as we think about the year, we try to map that out ahead of time and actually build a calendar that says, okay, this is going to be plan number one on the year, all the way up to our end goal of plans, and then build in time on those dates that if it's going to take a consult here to do this and a design meeting here to do this and a signing to do this, we actually go ahead and map that out. And so we can sort of fill in the blanks as we go of, hey, how are we doing? And are we making progress toward that goal? Again, my approach is more of a client served approach versus a dollars in the door approach. I don't know if you build it that way as well. And we try to do the math the other way, but I always want to focus on that client service piece first, because I think that keeps me in the right mindset as I'm thinking about my practice.
Yeah, and I have a little bit more of a revenue centric focus, I would imagine. As you're thinking about those revenue goals, you always have to be thinking about, you have to remember we're servants. As attorneys, we are servants. In any given client conversation, any email that you're drafting, any letter, you got to approach it with that attitude of I'm actually serving this client. I think of the signature line that was really old school. I am very truly your most obedient servant, humble and obedient servant, that kind of thing. We don't really use that as much anymore. It's been shortened to very truly yours, but it really is an attitude in approaching clients that you're approaching as a servant to this person who has a need that you can help them with. And I was actually talking to my team today about how can I achieve my revenue goals. Well, I put it into bite-sized pieces, and I told them, well, if I get kind of a larger estate plan or Medicaid plan in place in 1 week, and then I've got 2 or 3 other estate plans, that's going to get me to where I want to be from a revenue standpoint. Is the revenue, the year-long revenue goal kind of daunting for me? Yeah, I've never achieved it yet, and you know what it is. So I've never achieved it yet, but putting it into bite-sized chunks and saying, in this week I've just got to you know retain 2, 3, maybe 4 clients. That's a little bit easier than saying I've got this big lofty goal. So I guess that's one takeaway that I would suggest to people is, yeah, put your hairy ostentatious goal out there, but at the same time break it up into bite-sized pieces where you can kind of it's manageable to you. And we've talked about that over the years, how if you want to make your goal meaningful, you don't want the goal to be so great that it's unachievable, but also you don't want it to be so easy that you're not going to be working hard to achieve it. So striking that right balance is really important in 2025. And so that's what I've tried to do. In 2024, I had some changes to the law firm, worked through those, and I feel like in 2025 we're ready to roll and really grow the practice.
Yeah, and it's so much fun on a day-to-day basis to come in and do the work that's there and have that plan and try to accomplish things. I'm very guilty of creating a to-do list that's a mile long. And then it just kind of follows me around. So you never quite get the number down, but it just kind of hangs around and hangs around. And so one of the things I've really tried to do this year as I've prepared for this is I break my day up into like a basketball game. I played a lot of basketball growing up, and so that's kind of the analogy that most resonates with me. And so I break my time up into I have a pregame time, which is sort of my time at home or before I go into work. And just that's the time where I focus on planning for the day and doing devotions and those kind of things throughout my pregame time. Then I break it into quarters. So I have quarter one, and then I have a timeout between quarter one and quarter two, and then I have a halftime for lunch, quarter three and quarter four. Then I have a post game that kind of I want to do at the end of the day to make sure I'm evaluating what I did that day, preparing for the next day. Then I have two other kind of blocks that I can use. One is called post game. So sometimes our world, or I'm sorry, overtime, because sometimes our world does go into overtime and we have things we got to do, court hearings, run long, depositions, those kind of things. And then I have that post game press conference, which is kind of that marketing type mentality. So I may have some evening events, or that may be a breakfast event or something. But having that and then trying to kind of sequence within those blocks the activities that I want to get done that day. And so I usually pick out 3 most important tasks that have to get done on a particular day, write those down, and then I put them in one of those blocks to make sure that I'm getting that done. And so, like you say, taking those larger goals and breaking them down into their component parts, and then being disciplined enough to execute against that every day, you can achieve pretty much what you put your mind to doing that, which is pretty cool. And so again, there's some materials that I can link to in the show notes in terms of how to structure those goals or set them out in a way that are just hitting the things that give you the best chance of success, different frameworks and things that we've written about in the past. But I agree with you. It's a little daunting when you look at here's the year in, but maybe if I divide that by 4 and I get it into quarters, okay, each quarter I could do, and then month, and then a week, and then down to your day and those kind of things. So pretty cool.
Yeah, and I like the way that you do that. It doesn't quite fit with my mindset, as you've told me. It doesn't work for everybody, but the idea of gamifying your work, and that's what you're doing there with first, second, third, fourth quarters, overtime, press conference, halftime. that just kind of makes the day fun for you, I'm sure, and kind of puts you into, I don't know, probably a little bit of a competitive mindset. It's fourth quarter. It's the end of the day. I'm tired, but I gotta finish strong. Gamifying that can really be a good mindset shift for lawyers. And one thing about Clio is, and that's one of the law practice management programs that we use, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more in detail as we go through this season of Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. But it sets out your daily revenue goals and your weekly revenue goals and where you should be if you're going to achieve those, and that kind of makes it fun. And you can see what your progress is, as to your yearly goal as well. And so you're seeing your progress. And I think there's something about the endorphin. There must be endorphins that hit whenever you hit that goal on the Clio dashboard. And I think for me, that's kind of how I've gamified it. And I know that you've got the same program, but that kind of keeps you on edge and says, okay, this is where I need to be, and gives you a goal that you visualize. The keys, and my wife was an athlete in college, and her big thing was you need to write down the goal. It doesn't count if you don't write it down. And her last season, in track and field, she wrote down her goals and she achieved every one of them, but she was mad because she finished in third place and that was her goal. She should have had higher goals. So writing down goals is also kind of part of the process to help you achieve those goals.
Yeah, 100%. And there's a passage that talks about making vision plain. And I think a lot of times when you're dreaming about something and you wonder if you can ever do that or accomplish that, the act of writing it down helps you just define it more clearly. And then you start looking at it and go, well, if I do this, that'll at least get me a little bit closer today, and then a little bit more closer and a little bit closer. And so just that inertia gets built up. And you mentioned Clio. The benefit of that is you're kind of starting with the end in mind and going, okay, what can I try to accomplish this year? And it does all the breakdown for you, so you don't have to do the extra math to figure it all out. It will tell you, and your job is to show up, serve your clients well, track what you're doing, and keep that moving forward each and every day. And I know when I was first starting out as a lawyer, billing time was a very difficult thing because there was a high level of expectation and you had no experience against that. So knowing what was appropriate to bill or not appropriate to bill and those kind of things. And so my general advice to folks, if they're kind of starting that out, or even if they're just trying to increase their habit on that, is track everything that you do. Then when it comes time to actually send a bill to a client, you can review that and make sure that it's appropriate to bill, but you'll know the effort that you put in there. And many lawyers I know are more aggressive at self-editing than billing their clients for, right? There's that innate sense of, is this the right thing? Is it reasonable? Is it fair? And so I have tried to train myself to track everything. I don't always do a great job of that, but just to really analyze internally, what does this activity really take in terms of time? And then can I really give a good reflection to that and go, yeah, that's something I can do, or this is the right pricing for that. That's fair for the client and fair for me in light of all the other work that I have going on.
Yeah, and that kind of gets to the question of whether you should be a flat fee or an hourly billing attorney. One neat feature of Clio, I feel like I've learned everything I know about law practice management from Clio and in consultation with you. But in Clio, you've got the new feature where you can track your billable time and you can track your non-billable time, but then also you can keep and actually put your non-billable time onto the invoice. So the client can see the non-billable time that you've actually put in and then see what you've billed for and see how reasonable a self editor you are. And I think a client will appreciate that. You're not going to get as much pushback on billing if they see that you haven't billed for everything. And so
Yeah, and that facilitates that conversation. And a lot of that is, once you've gained the experience, for the most part, okay, I'm pretty accurate at estimating what the cost is going to be for someone, so long as these variables are true. There's a lot of times in the law where we just don't know. We don't know how the other side's going to respond. We don't know if somebody's going to raise an objection. We don't know X, Y, or Z variables. And so in those cases, it's very difficult to give a good estimate. However, on some cases, we know, hey, this is pretty much what it's going to take, and here's how we're going to go. And we're able to communicate that pretty clearly. And those are good candidates for that flat fee type arrangement. That just gives some certainty to everybody about this. I know this is what it's going to take and about how long and how much it's going to cost. And everybody can just focus on actually getting the information exchanged that needs to be exchanged and getting the work done that needs to be done.
Yeah, and I can remember being in those situations where it was going to be an hourly fee that I was going to charge early on in my legal career, and the client was wondering, how much is this going to cost? And I had to say, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I have no idea, actually. That comes with experience, for one. You've got to kind of go through those things to have an expectation of how much time it's going to be. If it's a simple eviction that you're, billing on, probably not going to be $2,500, But as a young attorney, you don't necessarily know that. And I'm thankful that I had some clients early on that knew that I was young and were patient with me and understood, he's kind of getting his feet wet. We're going with him anyway. And that experience was invaluable to me. But you got to have some self-awareness that you can't be overcharging for simple matters like I just mentioned to you. So yeah, I think it's always a fine line of what should I charge and what should I not charge, what's reasonable, what's not. But having an older attorney, a more experienced attorney that you can call and talk to and say, hey, what would be a reasonable fee in this particular scenario? That's important, and it brings some credibility to that conversation with the client. You can say, well, I've never done this kind of matter before, but I've talked to this mentor that I have, and he says, well, it's probably going to be about this much. This is what a reasonable expectation would be. And I think that would make the client feel quite a bit better about the situation.
Yeah, and communication is so important in that, and just being honest with people and saying, you know what, here's a guess, here's an estimate, a budget, but we're gonna have to adjust it as we go. And that's also for a newer lawyer, just understanding that you can become competent in an area, but not every case is the right case to try that on. And so you want to just know your limitations, have enough confidence to do what you need to do, but also know when you need maybe to get somebody else involved. And there's plenty of more seasoned attorneys that will work with you and help you through the first time that you do a more complicated thing than you've done before, because they were at that stage in their career one time and likely somebody helped them. That's where that communication comes in, and having the confidence to tell the client, hey, I really don't know, but I can get the answer for you. And that's okay. And that's the mark of you learning and growing and maturing as a younger lawyer, to gain that self-awareness and confidence of client service, and making sure that they're getting what they need, even if it's not always in your best interest in terms of, hey, I need the case or whatever. That's always that balance, but certainly an opportunity to demonstrate your willingness to serve the client in the best way, putting their interest ahead of your own in that situation.
We've kind of mentioned a flat fee structure. You alluded to that a little bit. And, in my practice, I tend to be more on the flat fee side of things. I think you've started to do more of the flat fee kind of thing in recent years. And I always felt like the flat fee is a good option for people because there's a value that you're providing to them. For instance, with a revocable trust, there's, the fact that you're getting an estate plan done is valuable in and of itself. but then secondly, you are saving the client's family the costs and expenses of an estate administration potentially, and guiding that client through what needs to be done in order to avoid a probate administration. And the same could be true for any number of cases. So I don't practice in intellectual property, but intellectual property is probably one of those same kind of practice areas that you could do a flat fee structure on. Business planning is a great way of doing a flat fee. Somebody that needs an LLC operating agreement, needs to create a buy-sell agreement with other partners in the business. Those things probably can be done on a flat fee basis, depending upon the complexity and the players involved. But I've found that it's nice because clients know what they're getting into and they're not surprised by anything. They may say, well, that's a little bit more expensive than I thought it was going to be, but also you're welcome to call me at any time and have a conversation with me about whatever concern it is related to what you've hired me to do. And I think there's some assurance of that, and it kind of helps the client to feel more comfortable in talking with the attorney.
Yeah. And again, it really is that client service model. You may have a question, but if you think you're going to get billed to ask the question, that's not exactly encouraging the free flow of information. And I get it, because in some cases that's just the best way to handle it. Litigation is a prime example of, when you're in litigation, you don't have any control over the litigation. The court system does. And so you have to comply with the rules, or you could have a legal consequence as a result. And so there's not really an option there. When you're doing estate planning and those kind of things, they just lend themselves better to saying, hey, this is the project we are helping you accomplish. And there's sort of a definitive box around what you're trying to do. And so you can get a better estimate of value for that for folks. I would be interested in that client who says, you know what, that was actually less than I was thinking. I don't think I've ever had a client say, yeah, that was less than I was expecting. So that's one of those challenges that I think everybody faces, right? We're trying to be fair to everyone. We got to keep the lights on around here, all of those things. We're fortunate, in our practice to work with clients on a more proactive area versus a reactive area a lot of times. Not to say that that doesn't happen, but when you're planning for something and have a little bit of a runway to accomplish that, it's a little bit easier to digest what the cost is going to be, rather than if you find yourself faced with a lawsuit that you're trying to respond to.
Yeah, we definitely do practice in the area of, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they say. And that's what estate planning is in a lot of ways. We can help families avoid disaster in the practice areas that we practice in, with estate planning and business planning as a part of that as well. We've talked about a lot of different things today. Talked about goal setting. We've talked about fee structure and kind of the client conversation with, regarding billing and attorney fees and all of that. Anything else you want to add to the conversation today, Seth?
There's so much to unpack when you're talking about law practice, and there's so many little avenues and things that we could go down. And so I think the big thing is, again, we're trying to provide that resource for someone who may start to think, hey, maybe it's time for me to start my own practice, or for whatever reason. Maybe it's just a transitionary stage, or maybe you're starting out, just graduating from law school. And I think that's kind of just start getting some of these questions swirling in your mind and start answering them a little bit as you go through that. Okay, well, if I needed to survive year one, how much would I need to make? How much are my expenses going to be? How much are my taxes going to be? You kind of have to figure a few of those pieces out ahead of time, and that's going to drive a lot of the revenue discussion for the office as well, to make it a viable opportunity for you to start your own practice.
Yeah, and I can relate. When I came out of law school, I felt like I could take the risk of starting out on my own, because I ended up living back with my parents. So I had no housing costs. So with zero housing costs, I could afford to potentially make zero money. And so that was I kind of thought, I've got nothing to lose. I've got this opportunity. Let's go for it. I wasn't going back to the house to live in the basement and never come up and just play video games all day. I was going back with, a mission, but that was part of the risk analysis for me. Can I afford to do this? And at that point in time, the economy was such that it was, probably as hard or, you know, even more difficult to find a job in the legal space than it was to open up, a practice. That was 2014, just coming off a few years after the recession. I was kind of like, what do I got to lose? But yeah, the analysis was, how much income do I need to make? You know, and this year I can go for it. I had the ability to do it at that point. But yeah, you got to do that cost benefit analysis when you're thinking about opening up your own practice.
Well, I'm kind of chuckling because I remember those times, and there was definitely not a down time for you because not only were you opening the practice, you were doing multiple other jobs to
Right.
support the practice.
That's
There
true.
was
That's
there
true.
was a lot of extra effort going on, and even I think you were doing tax returns and things, and you were doing document review, and you did chins cases and all kinds of stuff that helped get you to the point of actually accomplishing kind of the goal of, I really want to focus on these specific areas of practice and have that sustain me. And so don't have the illusion that, hey, I just open a website and all the clients are going to come in and the revenue's coming and it's good. This is a long road, and a lot of times it takes a lot of extra effort beyond that which you see more seasoned lawyers who have gone through that. You don't want to skip that process. It's not fun, but it is part of that growing process of learning to really value the client that you have in front of you because you've worked in so many different areas that you take that special responsibility to say, boy, this is such a trusted relationship. I don't want to do anything that would jeopardize that. So I'm going to give you my best work. I'm going to give you my best thought, my best efforts on all the things that I'm doing and try to earn that because if I do, you're going to go tell somebody else potentially. Or at least I will be thought well of for having done the work and maybe had the chance for you to tell somebody else, right? And that's then how the practice grows. But it takes time, and we'll talk about more of that on future episodes, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, there's a whole story of about a couple years there where I was doing quite a bit. So yeah, we'll have to go into more detail on that at some other time. But I think that will probably do it for this episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. Seth, how can people reach you?
Thomas, the best way to find us is at our website, adlerattorneys.com. There's a contact us page on the front page of that website. You can get in touch with us that way. How about you?
The best way to get in touch with me is by going to viclaw.org, and there you can book a call. Well, I think that will do it for today, Seth. We'll talk to you later, and thanks everyone for watching.
Thanks, Thomas.